All right, now we have the virtual texture support, and it's time to bring in our asset, and I would like to show you how that's being done. So we've got the goblet in here, which is an FBX file, and we've got the textures, okay? So I'm gonna go into my content browser in here, and I'm going to right click and select a new folder. And then in here, I'm going to call this static meshes, okay? So this is where we're going to store them. Double click and then create a new folder, call this SM goblet or something like that, right? Just to keep a track of it. Then in here, we can drop in our mesh. Now I'm just going to Alt Tab, and I've got my wall near here. I'm gonna drag it over into the into this panel, and we'll be met with the FBX import option. So this is a static mesh. There's nothing fancy about it, and it's gonna ask us a few questions in here of the import, how to import stuff. So let's assume that the Wolnir goblet is made out of multiple different meshes, which is most likely is. If you don't click combine meshes, then you'll get for every one of those meshes, if they're sort of separate, you're going to get them as separate entities. So let's say we don't click this. By the way, you can also build nanite here if you'd like. We don't really need it, but if you want, that's fine. For this particular mesh, so then anything that we import is going to be nanite, but you've got to make sure that then if you're using materials like with opacity and things like that, with alphas, then there's a different workflow for that if you're using nanite. But let's just import this. So you got import all and import. Now import all is very important if you're not actually combining the meshes, but if you are, then import will just simply combine them anyway. But we'll do import all without combining the meshes, and let's see if we actually get multiple different assets. Now it says in here importing 3 out of 44. This already gives me sort of a bad vibe in the sense of there's probably a lot of different meshes that it's trying to import. So let's have a look. And as you can see, there's like loads of meshes in here, right? They've all been imported like that. There's like, you've got like the cranium here and you've got the teeth, So this is all the geometry that's actually in there. So it's not really good. But let's say you've actually got it this way and now you have to deal with it. What do you do? So if you're going to keep it this way and not import it with combined meshes, or there's a couple of options that what you can do here. So I'm going to show you let's say option number 1. Let's call it option number 1. I'm going to give me 1 second. Just going to put my blender up here. So I'm going to import the Wolnir sort of mesh in here just to show you directly what's going to happen. I think this is very important. So import FBX into Blender. We're just going to double click the high and import FBX. So we've got all of these parts in here, and there's like loads of different ones in here. You can see every little bit that Unreal Engine has also imported in. So then if you'd really want, you could start selecting different parts of the mesh, like all of these, for example, here, and then Control J to make them into a singular object. And then you can take this and then Control J, make that into another object. And then you select all of this stuff at the top here, all of these, and then make those into an object. So now you've got 3 objects instead of 44 or whatever, or however many there were. And this should help you if you want to keep that in a more in a nice, more cohesive way. But the problem, not the problem, but the whole thing is like you're gonna have 3 meshes as opposed to just combining all the meshes in Unreal Engine and getting just one. But as I said, you might have different applications. But let's say you actually have all of these assets. So is this something that you can do with these? And I will say, yeah, you can use a blueprint. So this is not very advanced stuff. This is actually quite basic, but it's actually going to be a very good lesson for you for the future, because it's going to help you in many other different circumstances, not just here. So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, in Unreal, we're going to right click, select the blueprint class, and we're going to select BP actor. I'm going to call this BP goblet as an example. Okay, now if you double click, this will open the blueprint itself, and we've got it over here. And we can actually, put it up here, or yeah, let's just dock it over here. Now, the blueprint is empty, but we can control space and have a look at all the assets. If I click this one and then shift select everything all the way to the bottom, it will select all of these meshes, and I can actually drag them in here. And what you're going to notice very quickly is that all the assets are now in the scene. So all of the goblet assets are now in here, and they're actually in place as they were in the Blender file. And that's because the blueprint is smart enough to, it's not, well, it actually is not the blueprint, it's more like where all the objects are in the world, right? So because they've been exported from whatever source file, maybe it was Blender, maybe it was ZBrush, I don't know, because everything was in the center of the world at these coordinates, it will know where every one of these components needs to be. And this gives you a bit of control because you're now able to effectively come in here and you're able to use, you're able to actually have a look at using all these assets, looking at all these assets individually, and you're able to change some of the stuff in there if you'd like. I think the only biggest downside that I can see here is the fact that you're going to have all of these materials and you are going to have to, effectively start populating them. So if we select all of them, you're only seeing UDIM 1, but there's like multiple materials. So it's got in here display all 3 materials. So luckily you can see all 3 of them, and then you can start dropping in the elements. But just bear in mind that this is going to be, you're going to have to do this, add the materials here as well, right? But okay, the workflow here is very complex. Do we really need to go this far? Probably not. So I think, what we're going to do is we're going to select everything and actually delete them. And we're just going to go for the easy approach, which is basically dragging and dropping the mesh and combining it. Okay, so dragging and dropping, combine meshes, import, and now you're seeing it's doing the same thing where it says that it's importing loads of static mesh geometry, but it doesn't really matter because, Unreal Engine will now transform that into one mesh, okay? But now you cannot select individual objects, they're literally combined. And we've got the materials already in here, which is quite nice. Now, normally you'd want to name these based on what your asset is as well. We're just going to leave it as it is, but as you'll notice, they have been named by whoever made this asset into UDIM 1, 2, 3, okay? So, what I would also want to do is if you go to Window, you go to Content Browser, you can actually create new content browsers. So, this is one content browser, this is another one. And why is that important? Well, because you can go in here in Static Meshes, open the goblet, and open it over here as well. And then you can have a new folder which is called Textures. And I'm trying to sort of teach you how the Unreal Engine functions, how people sort of read all of this information and how you can make a scene that's a lot more cohesive for everybody else to work with. So you can have textures, you can add a new folder, you could call this goblet or something like that, just so these are the textures for the goblet, okay? And then you can also come in here, create a new folder, and call this materials. Now this is important because once you have a lot more assets into the scene, this is going to become a lot more important for you to keep a track of. So in the materials, we can add all these free materials, move them over here. So that gives us, obviously more control. By the way, all of these have already been added to this mesh automatically when you import it. So that's great. And now we need to bring in the textures, okay? So we're going to bring them into this folder in here. I'm just going to have a look. So these are the textures. We're just going to drag and drop them all into here. And what you'll notice is that, oh, actually, there's some issues with the import. Okay, I'm not really sure what the issues were. Strange. But what you'll notice now is that these have been sort of combined, right? So what do I mean by this? Well, basically, you can see 1, 2, 3. So this mesh, this is UV tile 1, 2, and 3. So it's already done it. And if we didn't have a virtual texture support enabled, right, then we wouldn't be able to see it this way. We would actually see each of them individual, but then they wouldn't be useful in our materials. So if we go in here, we only have 3 materials. So if you had like this diffuse texture, if you had it 3 times, how would you add 3 different textures to the one material? You know, you effectively couldn't unless you sort of mold, you know, added between them, but that would then just make them overlap. So we're going to double click the material and have a look in here, and we're going to set up only one because I've already got it set up. I'm just going to get that asset in once it's done, but let's just do it for one of these very quickly. Okay, let me just delete this base color, and we're going to drag in the this diffuse, and we're going to add it in here. Let's bring this AO. By the way, Sketchfab, obviously, depending on what type of assets you're getting, the textures, some textures will be different than others. So it's really trying to read this information. So AO comes from ambient occlusion, diffuse base color. You've got an emissive, which of course has an emissive connection right in here. Then you've got a height, which we're not going to use in this particular bit, but we've got metallic, normal, and roughness. We can select all 3 of these and drag them in here. Now, this is the, I believe this was the metallic. Okay, so we can put that in there. Normally, people will pack these textures into one texture. So the metallic, the roughness, and the ambient occlusion. That goes into the normal, and this goes into the roughness. And now if we press apply, the material has been applied for UDIM 1001. So if we have a look back into our Unreal Engine, let me just get this material out of the way. If we go into our static meshes and we have a look at the goblet and we double click it, you will notice that the goblet is now got textures on the skull, okay? Because that's where UDIM 1 is active. So now we can do the same thing for UDIM 2 and UDIM 3, respectively. You are literally going to use the same textures because everything is encoded now into these textures. So UDIM 2 and UDIM 3 will use the same textures as here. So you literally copy these into there, connect them, and that's it, and it's done. So I'm going to now migrate my mesh from somewhere else where I've already got it set up. So there's no need for me to continue with this. But you can obviously get that from the project file. If not, hook them up together yourselves, and that will be fine.